He didn't just cheat on her. He erased her name from the company she helped build, stole her future, then humiliated her in front of 300 people like it was entertainment. But the most shocking part? She came back years later richer, colder, and standing beside a man whose silence was more terrifying than Adrian's entire empire. And that was the moment his downfall truly began.
Heels. At 7:43 on the night of their 11th wedding anniversary, Vivian Hale stood alone in the powder room off the east corridor of the Briarcliff Grand and pressed both hands against the marble sink until the blood drained from her knuckles. Heels. Outside, beyond the thick ivory door, a ballroom full of money laughed in soft, polished bursts. Crystal glasses touched. A string quartet moved through a tidy arrangement of standards that all rich people seemed to know without ever really hearing. Heels. Waiters in white jackets drifted past with trays of tuna tartare, saffron arancini, and tiny desserts no one actually wanted but everyone photographed. The room had been curated to signal old taste and fresh power. Cream roses, low gold light, Heels, Lynn so crisp it looked theatrical, every detail approved by her. Heels. Every detail paid for by the company she had helped build from a one-room office above a dry cleaner when she and Adrian had been 23 and reckless and still believed love and ambition were the same thing wearing different clothes. Heels. She had chosen the flowers. She had picked the wine list. She had talked Adrian out of the ice sculpture because ice sculptures were vulgar unless you were already vulgar and proud of it. She knew which senators were coming. Heels. Which investors would arrive late, on purpose, which wives were quietly miserable, which husbands were sleeping with women who had never attended their college reunions because they were not old enough to remember the decade. Heels. She knew the room because for 11 years she had learned how rooms like that breathed. She had learned when to smile, when to say less, when to step back so Adrian could expand. She had mistaken that skill for partnership. Heels. In the mirror, she looked expensive, rested, composed, pale champagne silk. Heels. Hair pinned simply. Makeup soft enough to say confidence, not hunger. That had been Adrian's preference for years. Elegant, restrained. Let the other women compete with sequins and desperation. She had once found that flattering. Heels. By year 7, she knew it was control dressed as taste. Tonight, she stood very still and listened through the wall without meaning to. Adrian's study shared a wall with the powder room. She had forgotten. Heels. She had been in and out of that room 100 times and never once leaned in close enough to hear the life on the other side. But tonight she heard his voice, low and irritated, and then another voice, female silk wrapped around steel. Heels. You keep saying tonight. I said I'll handle it. You've been saying that for 6 months. A pause. The sound of a glass set down too hard. Then Adrian again, tighter now. The contracts are done. Her name isn't on anything anymore. Heels. Vivian stopped breathing, not figuratively. Literally, her body forgot. Heels. The room seemed to tilt half an inch. She moved closer before she could decide not to. Legally, she can't do a thing. I don't care about legally, the woman said. I care that you said she'd be gone before the quarter closed. Then a softer note. Heels. Intimate, possessive. Don't lose your nerve now. I'm not losing my nerve. Then prove it. Silence. A kiss. Small, wet. Familiar in the way a knife is familiar once it is already in your side. Vivian stepped back so fast her hip struck the sink. Heels. Somewhere in the ballroom beyond the door, somebody laughed again. The ordinary cruelty of that nearly undid her. Not the affair. Heels. Not even the revelation that Adrian had been stripping her name off the architecture of the company while calling it routine paperwork and sliding folders across kitchen counters with, "Babe, just sign this." It's restructuring. Heels. We're simplifying the subsidiaries. No, what nearly undid her was the fact that the party was still going on. Heels. The flowers were still opening under candlelight. The quartet was still playing. Waiters were still carrying crab cakes past the worst moment of her life, as if humiliation were simply another course in the meal. Heels. She straightened because women like her straightened. That had been drilled into her by her mother, by social expectation. Heels. By every boardroom in which she had been talked over, and then expected to smile when the same idea came out of a man's mouth 10 minutes later. She checked her lipstick, fixed a loose strand of hair, opened the door. Heels. The ballroom hit her like a furnace. Bright, loud, scented with champagne and expensive perfume and money, pretending it had no smell. She moved back into it on instinct and saw Adrian crossing the floor toward her with a woman at his side. Red dress. Heels. black hair pinned high, face made for magazine covers and courtroom sympathy. Camille Devereaux. Vivian had seen her name in emails, in calendar lines, in vague references to outside consulting deals. She had not seen her hand on Adrian's forearm. Not until now. Not until he walked through his own anniversary party with the posture of a man who had finally decided to stop hiding the thing he was most pleased with. "Viv," he said brightly, feels as if she were late to something trivial. "There you are. There are moments in adult life when time does not slow down, not really. It's simply accepted." One layer continues as normal. Music, light, small talk. The other layer becomes razor-sharp, heels. Vivian saw the seam of Adrian's jacket, the sheen of Camille's lipstick, the tiny bruise near Camille's wrist where a bracelet had sat too tight. She saw a waiter glance at them, then away, heels. She saw Miller from legal pretending to study a floral arrangement because men like Miller can smell liability faster than blood. "Camille," Adrian said, smiling the smile he used on cameras and donors and strangers with private jets, heels, has become indispensable to the business. "How lovely," Vivian said, heels. Her own voice frightened her a little, calm, almost warm. "I'm sure indispensable people always arrive right on time." Camille tilted her head. Her smile was professionally gracious and personally cold. "I've heard so much about you. Have you?" Heels, Vivian asked. "Only the best," Camille said. Which in a room like that could mean anything from admiration to obituary. Adrian checked his watch. There it was, the tell. He used to do it before major pitches, before television interviews, deals, before any moment that required choreography. Vivian knew then, with a certainty so clean it was almost peaceful, that he was going to do it publicly. He had not only built a private betrayal, he had planned a stage. "Come on," he said softly, heels, fingers brushing her elbow. "It's time." She let him lead her to the small platform at the far end of the ballroom, because shock often disguises itself as obedience. The microphone waited. The spotlight came up. The room drew inward. Heels. Adrian lifted his glass first, then set it down and took the mic with both hands, humble for effect. "Friends," he began. Warm applause. "Thank you for coming tonight." Heels. 11 years ago, a broke kid with a bad haircut and one lucky idea somehow convinced a woman far too good for him to marry him in a courthouse in Queensgate. Laughter. The story had become corporate myth, heels. Investors loved humble beginnings as long as they were over. Adrian turned toward her with practiced tenderness. "That woman is standing next to me tonight." More applause, heels. Vivian fixed her gaze on a cracked line in the back plaster above the exit and waited. He thanked her. Of course he did. Loyalty, grace, sacrifice. He praised her labor in the company, heels, which many in the room had never known because she had made a career of being useful without being loud about it. A woman near the front dabbed delicately at her eyes. Then Adrian inhaled. But there it was. The word that opens trap doors under lives. Heels. He spoke about growth, about truth, about changing seasons, about needing the right person to captain the ship into deeper water. Vivian felt the heat of the spotlight on her face and remembered, absurdly, heels. An article she had once read about interrogation lamps. He said they wanted different things. He said pretending would dishonor them both, heels. Then he held out his hand toward the audience, and Camille rose from the front table and stepped onto the stage, like she had rehearsed the heel height for that climb. "This," Adrian said, heels, voice breaking in exactly the places that would read sincere on video, "is Camille. She has been the heart of this company for 2 years, and effective tonight she will be taking the seat at this table that has been empty for far too long." Heels. Somewhere a glass shattered. No one moved. That was the mercy and the horror of elite spaces. They can watch a public execution and still worry about appearing uncultured. Adrian turned to Vivian, eyes wet, heels. She understood all at once that he could summon tears by will. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know how else to do this." That lie, more than the affair, more than the theft, more than the spectacle, gave her back a sliver of herself, heels, because she knew exactly how else he could have done it. Privately, honestly, humanely. He had chosen the crowd because power had made him mistake cruelty for courage, so she took the microphone out of his hand. Later, heels, she would remember that as the sound of the night changing. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small intake in the room, a rustle of wealth discovering the script had shifted. Adrian flinched. Camille's smile wavered, heels. Vivian lifted the mic and heard her own breathing once. "Thank you, Adrian," she said. The room leaned closer, for finally being honest in public. She turned to Camille, and welcome, truly, a beat. "I hope he is to you everything he was to me." Heels. Then she placed the microphone back in Adrian's hand. stepped down from the stage, and walked through the center of the ballroom with her spine straight and her face composed while 300 people with doctorates, inherited fortunes, heels, elected offices, private scandals, and custom tuxedos made way for her like she was carrying a flame. In the lobby, Marisol was waiting, heels. Marisol had worked in the Hale house for 9 years and possessed the kind of loyalty that cannot be purchased because it is rooted in witnessing. She did not ask a single foolish question. Small suitcase, she whispered. Vivian nodded. Passport? Heels. Another nod. Cash from the closet safe. Please. Marisol touched her wrist. Don't call anybody from your regular phone. Even then, even split open, Vivian understood the warning. Men like Adrian do not merely leave, they secure the perimeter. Heels. Mari, she said, and her voice almost failed on the name. I need 5 minutes. You have 4. Heels. The small black suitcase was waiting when she reached the side entrance. Marisol had added jeans, 2 sweaters, underwear, cash, passport, a burner phone still in packaging, heels, and a folded scrap with an address in Redondo Beach where her sister Teresa lived above a laundromat and minded her own business like it was a religion. Go somewhere first, Marisol said. Anywhere. Then there. Thank you, heels. Marisol gripped her face in both hands the way mothers do when there is no time left for softness. Listen to me. What happened in there is shameful, but it is not your shame. Do you understand? Heels. He wants you to carry his shame out of that room so he can feel lighter. Leave it here. Make him drag it himself. Vivian nodded because if she opened her mouth, she might come apart in the driveway. The hired town car took her to the airport. Heels. The driver did not ask questions. Heels. He turned up the heat when he saw her shivering and spoke only once 40 minutes into the ride, when the city had thinned into overpasses and sodium lights. My wife left me 22 years ago with 1 suitcase, he said quietly. Heels. Eyes still on the road. Best thing that ever happened to both of us. Hurt like hell first. Then he fell silent again, gifting her the dignity of no follow-up. At the terminal, she bought a ticket with cash, heels, changed out of the anniversary dress into leggings and a sweatshirt from an all-night shop, and threw the silk into a trash can. Not the suitcase. The trash. Some things should not be archived. She turned her phone on once in a bathroom stall, heels. Missed calls flooded the screen. Her mother, sisters-in-law, numbers she barely recognized. Adrian, 6 times, texts stacked over one another, concern and curiosity and gossip wearing concern's coat. She did not read past the first few. Heels. She turned the phone face down on the toilet tank, stared at it for a long second, then dropped it into the bowl and flushed. It bobbed stupidly. She left it there. On the red eye, she did not sleep. Heels. She watched the city lights fall away beneath the wing and thought, with a clarity that would return to her often over the next 3 years, I was disappearing long before tonight. Tonight was just the first moment everyone else could see it. Heels. That understanding would become one of the quiet educational truths of her second life. Public humiliation almost never begins in public. It begins in the 1,000 private permissions people give themselves to reduce another human being. Heels. A form slid across a counter, a joke at dinner, a decision made without consultation, a kindness withheld because someone assumes your loyalty is permanent. By the time a person is publicly discarded, feels they have often been privately erased for months or years. Vivian did not have that language yet. Heels. She only had nausea, rage so cold it felt organized, and the first rough outline of a vow she was not ready to admit. By morning she would be a woman in borrowed quiet with a different name and no audience at all. But the education of that night would stay with her forever. Love without respect rots into ownership, and ownership, when threatened, becomes cruelty with excellent table manners. Heels. Teresa opened the door at 6:58 the next morning, wearing a housecoat, slippers, and the expression of a woman who had already been told enough to decide compassion was the only useful response. Mari said, "Come in," she said. "Coffee's hot." Heels. The apartment smelled like bleach, starch, and frying onions from a neighboring unit. A truck rattled past below. Sunlight came in weak and gray through a kitchen window crowded with potted herbs. Vivian stood there with the suitcase still in her hand, heels. Overnight clothes from the airport hanging off her differently, now that adrenaline had burned away. She had expected curiosity. She got practicality. Teresa poured coffee, slid over a chipped mug and said, "We don't have to talk. We can also talk." Heels. Either is fine. Vivian sat, wrapped both hands around the mug, realized they were shaking. "I need a haircut," she said after a minute. Teresa looked at her for a long beat. "How much haircut?" "All of it." Heels. "Honey, All of it is usually grief talking. Then grief has good instincts. Teresa sighed through her nose, got scissors from a drawer, tied a towel around Vivian's shoulders, heels, and began cutting in the kitchen while the laundromat dryers hummed downstairs. Long dark strands fell to the linoleum in soft, expensive arcs. Teresa did not do salon chatter. She trimmed, assessed, adjusted, and let the silence hold. Halfway through, heels, she said. Sometimes people think changing how you look is about revenge. Usually it's about wanting your own reflection back. Vivian almost cried then. Not because of Adrian, heels, but because a stranger had understood her more honestly in 14 minutes than her husband had in years. When Teresa turned the chair toward the mirror, a sharper woman looked back. Younger, somehow, though there were no illusions left in her face. Heels. There, Teresa said. There you are. Vivian touched the short ends of her hair and said to the mirror very quietly, Vivian Hale is gone. Heels. Teresa did not correct her. Over the next 6 months, she learned the mechanics of becoming no one, and therefore slowly, someone again. Teresa's cousin introduced her to Rhoda Levin, Heels, who ran a bookkeeping office out of a converted dental practice 2 blocks off the boardwalk. Rhoda had dyed red hair, blunt opinions, and zero patience for theatrics. Heels. She asked Vivian to add 3 columns of numbers in her head while pretending not to watch how fast she did it. Then she handed over a key. Monday, Rhoda said. Cash under the table till I know you're not a lunatic. Heels. Vivian started at a metal desk under buzzing fluorescent lights with no frame degrees on the wall and no one who cared which charity gala she had once chaired. It was perfect. She learned payroll discrepancies for fishing co-ops, Heels, overdue invoices for marine suppliers, the odd habits of local contractors who paid in cash and forgot they had done so. Heels. She rented the narrow spare room in Teresa's apartment, which was barely more than a closet with a cot, and slept in fragments. The first month her body betrayed her nightly. Heels. She would wake at 2 or 3 with champagne taste in her mouth, and Adrian's speech playing in loops, each phrase obscene for having been rehearsed. Sometimes she sat up and counted the threads on her blanket until her pulse dropped. Heels. Sometimes she stood at the sink and breathed through panic while rain tapped the window. Trauma, she later learned in a therapist's office she did not enter until almost 2 years after leaving, is not drama. It is repetition. Heels. It is a body trying to protect you from a threat that is no longer in the room. It is an alarm with bad timing and excellent memory. Back then she did not have those words. Heels. She had the practical instruction Teresa gave her one sleepless dawn while stirring some oatmeal at the stove. When your mind starts replaying, give it a job. Heels. So Vivian gave her mind jobs, she read. Every evening after work, she went to the public library, a squat brick building with old carpet and lemon polish in the air, and sat at a scarred wooden table under a brass lamp until closing. Heels. She read finance textbooks, tax law guides, biographies of founders who had built and lost and rebuilt fortunes, articles on debt structures, trust formation, shell entities, litigation shielding, forensic accounting. At first it was survival. Heels. Numbers behaved. Contracts said what they said. A line item did not wake at 2:14 a.m. and call itself a fresh start while stealing your name out from under you. Numbers could be cruel, but they were not coy. Then reading became something else. Heels. The first low hum of reclamation. She began writing everything she could remember about Colehale Holdings, subsidiaries, partners, loan covenants, vendor relationships. Which bank officer Adrian charmed best? Which suppliers he bullied? Heels. Which accountants he trusted because they asked fewer questions. The legal pad filled, page after page in a hand that looked less elegant and more truthful than the one she had used to sign donor cards and holiday notes. Heels. 43 pages by the time she stopped. She slid it under her mattress and left it there. Not as a weapon, not yet. More like a life raft she no longer needed to cling to every minute but could not bear to throw away. She did not call her mother. Heels. That part hurt worst. Instead, she mailed a postcard from a town 2 exits off the highway with no return address. I'm alive. I'm safe. Don't look for me. I love you. It was cruel in its way, but necessary. Adrian had lawyers. Lawyers had reach. Heels. Reach was often mistaken for legitimacy. By month 4, Rhoda had stopped pretending not to know there was more to Vivian's history than a bad breakup and better cheekbones than most seaside bookkeepers acquire by accident. She never pushed. Heels. Instead, she fed Vivian half a tuna sandwich when she forgot lunch, loaned her a cardigan during a cold snap, and once said, while aligning deposit slips, some people survive by getting soft. Some survive by getting precise. Heels. I think you're a precise one. Vivian took that home and turned it over in her mind because it felt like both compliment and warning. Precision can save a life. It can also turn healing into strategy if grief is not allowed to move, feels. So she built small human rituals against that risk. Coffee with Teresa on Sundays. A walk on the boardwalk before dawn when insomnia hit. One evening a week with no finance books. Only novels she had once loved and barely remembered, feels. She relearned hunger. Relearned how to buy cheap groceries without feeling embarrassed. Relearned how to laugh when Rhoda swore at the copier. These details mattered more than she understood then. People often imagine rebirth as a dramatic event. Feels. In reality, it is domestic. Feels. It is laundry and rent and eating toast over a sink without hearing someone else's contempt in the room. It is discovering that your nervous system can, with time and care, stop expecting cruelty in every doorway. Feels. It is learning the moral lesson that respect is not an ornament added after success. It is the ground any livable life stands on. 6 months after arriving in Teresa's apartment, Rhoda passed Vivian a pink message slip with a name and number. Feels. Abriel Moss, she said. Runs payroll for a cluster of shipping companies 3 states south. Needs somebody who can read dirty books without getting excited. Pays double. Maybe triple if she likes you. Bigger city. More room to disappear. Feels. Vivian stared at the slip. Why are you helping me leave? Rhoda kept sorting receipts. Because hiding and healing are not always the same thing. Because this town was good for you. It might not be good forever, feels. And because if your past ever finds your future, you'll want more walls between them, feels. Vivian moved south 2 weeks later on a bus that smelled like diesel, paper coffee cups, and old vinyl. The port city Abriel worked in had green water, ship horns at night, feels. And enough legitimate commerce tangled around less legitimate commerce that asking too many questions was considered both rude and unsafe. Abriel Moss met her in a diner across from the station. 5 feet tall, late 50s, feels. Voice like gravel in a bucket, mermaid tattoo faded on her forearm. She hired Vivian halfway through eggs and black coffee. Rhoda says you're sharp, Abriel said. Sharp people are useful. Dramatic people are not. Which are you, feels. Trying to be useful, Vivian answered. Abriel grunted approval. Apartment over the office. Smells like mothballs. Rents nothing because the landlord owes me from 2014. Start Tuesday. Feels. That was how Vivian Lang became the tenant of a 1-bedroom above a payroll office in a city where nobody knew the name Hale and nobody cared about charity pages in old society magazines. The work was harder, riskier, more interesting, feels. Some of Abriel's clients were straightforward shipping concerns. Some very clearly were not. Vivian kept to the numbers and learned an adult truth that most people prefer not to say aloud. The world runs not on innocence but on systems, feels. And systems are only as ethical as the people who benefit from them are willing to insist. She flagged discrepancies. She learned which irregularities meant sloppiness and which meant theft, feels. She observed that entire industries survive on what everyone agrees not to notice. She also discovered her own surprise, that she was good under pressure, more than good, clear, feels. One rainy Tuesday, she caught a pattern in a stack of Moreno transport invoices that had slipped past 2 certified accountants and 1 internal reviewer. It was simple once seen, feels. Small duplicated charges moved across dates just enough to avoid casual scrutiny, a siphon rather than a heist. She wrote a crisp 1-page memo and left it on Abriel's desk. 3 weeks later, feels. At 7:58 on a Thursday night when Abriel was at a funeral out of state, and the office should have been empty except for Vivian closing the books, the intercom buzzed. We're closed, she said. A man's voice, low and unhurried, answered, feels. I have an appointment with Ms. Moss. She's out of town. Then perhaps with the person who caught the Moreno invoices. Vivian looked at the black and white security monitor on the corner of the desk. Feels. A man stood in the downstairs foyer in a dark overcoat, hands visible, posture patient. She had no reason to let him up. Feels. She did anyway, after sliding the letter opener out of the desk and into her sleeve. He climbed the stairs without hurry and walked into the office like a man who had spent his life entering rooms where no one wanted to be the first to speak. Early 40s, feels, maybe mid, broad-shouldered without vanity, dark suit under the coat, gray at the temples, a scar beginning at the edge of his left eyebrow and disappearing into his hairline. Not handsome in a polished way, built rather, feels, like a sentence that did exactly what it intended. He sat when told, kept his gloves in one hand, studied her with an attention that was not flirtation, not dismissal, not curiosity exactly, assessment. My name is Roman Verschetti, he said. Eels. Abriel and I have done business for a long time. 3 weeks ago, you saved me money. Vivian didn't move, then you'd say thank you and leave. The corner of his mouth shifted. Not quite a smile. Thank you, he said. Now I'd like to offer you a job. Eels. She almost laughed. Eels. You don't know me. I know enough to know you found something 2 paid professionals missed. He placed a leather folder on the desk between them. Inside are 3 pages. Companies, responsibilities, boundaries. Read them later if you like. Boundaries? Eels. Things I do not do. Things I do not ask the people around me to do. Which are narcotics, children, human beings as cargo, any woman in any situation who has not consented. There are other lines. Those are the ones most people ask first. Eels. The directness of it unsettled her more than evasion would have. Predators lie prettily. Dangerous, honest men are another category entirely. And the things you do, she asked. I move goods. Eels. I protect legitimate businesses that need protection in an illegitimate world. I hurt men who hurt where they should not. I own what I am. Then, after a beat, I don't ask people to be naive about me. It wastes everyone's time. He told her to call Abriel. Eels. Told her to call Sophia, a former accountant of his. Ask what I'm like to work for. Ask whether I keep my word. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, Ms. Lang, whatever happened to you before this, I'm not buying your past. I'm hiring your mind. Eels. If you want to sell your time. After he left, Vivian sat in the dead office with the folder unopened for 20 minutes. The radiator ticked. Somewhere in the alley, a cat fought with something smaller. Eels. She looked at her own reflection in the black window and saw not fear exactly, but recognition. There are moments when life offers not safety but scale. This was one. Abriel confirmed the next morning that Roman was dangerous, disciplined. Eels. Old-fashioned about loyalty, and shockingly literal about promises. Sophia reached by phone, talked for 47 minutes and said, among other things, he is not a good man in the church pamphlet sense. He is not a bad man in the cartoon sense. Eels. He is exact. That matters more than charm. Eels. Vivian took the job in April, not because Roman fascinated her, though he did, and not because she trusted him, which she did not yet. Eels. But because somewhere between Briarcliff and the port city, she had learned that rebuilding a life requires more than hiding from the people who broke it. It requires stepping into situations large enough to grow you past their reach. Eels. She told him over breakfast in a diner, I'm taking this for the money, the apartment, and the terms, not for you. Roman drank black coffee. That seems wise. She almost smiled. Eels. It was the first time a powerful man had met her caution without trying to flatter or conquer it. The lesson landed quietly but deep. Respect is often most visible where seduction is absent. Real power does not need to rush your boundaries. Eels. It can wait for your yes. Eels. Working for Roman Verschetti did not feel like falling into a romance. It felt like entering a weather system with laws she had to learn if she wanted to survive inside it. His legitimate holdings stretched across shipping, logistics, warehousing, Eels, hospitality, and construction, all linked by layers of entities that would have made a lesser accountant cry and a better one grin. Vivian grinned. The work demanded all of her. Eels. She rebuilt reporting structures that had grown dependent on habit and personal memory. She found another leakage pattern in under 3 weeks and traced it to a dock supervisor who had mistaken complexity for invisibility. Eels. Roman never told her exactly what happened to the man. She never asked. Instead, she watched the book settle afterward and noted that fear correctly applied produces a cleaner ledger than policy manuals ever do. Eels. She moved into the apartment Roman arranged above one of his quieter offices, a top-floor unit with plain furniture, clean lines, and a balcony looking out over the harbor. Bigger than she needed. Eels. Safer than anything she had slept in since leaving Adrian. There were rules, some spoken, some inferred. She was never summoned after midnight without reason, never expected to entertain, never treated like decorative intelligence. Eels. Meetings started when scheduled. Files arrived complete. Questions received answers. If Roman said he would be somewhere at 9, he was there at 8:58. That alone altered something in her nervous system. Eels. Reliability is medicinal when you have lived too long with strategic unpredictability. She met his core people one at a time. Sophia first, silver braid down her back, eyes sharp enough to open letters without a knife. Eels. She hugged Vivian the first day and murmured, I'm glad you came, with a sincerity so unperformed it nearly undid her. Eels. Then came Luca from compliance, who looked like a choir director and managed risk like a surgeon. Enzo from operations, who feared Sophia more than prison. Janine in contracts, feels, who never raised her voice and could destroy a negotiation with one missing clause. And finally, the men who did not fully belong to the legitimate side of Roman's life, but orbited it close enough to cast shadows. Feels. They were polite to her in a way that was neither patronizing nor intimate. That, she understood later, was Roman's design. She occupied a protected lane. No one touched it without consequence. Still, he did not hover. Feels. Sometimes she saw him twice a week, sometimes not at all. He would enter her office, sit in the chair opposite her desk, one elbow on the armrest, coat still on, Feels, and ask about receivables in Savannah or a contract exposure in Wilmington, or why 3 shell entities tied to a fuel distribution account suddenly looked nervous. She would explain. He would listen without interrupting. Feels. Then he would say thank you and leave. No flirtation, no compliments about her mind delivered like foreplay, no suggestive pauses. Yet something changed around month 6. She caught him once in the doorway while she laughed at something Sophia had said, Feels, and there was an expression on his face that vanished a half-second too late. Not softness exactly. Interest with respect braided through it. Dangerous, because respect had become more intimate to her than attention. Feels. Their first real rupture came at 2 in the morning in August, when a manager at one of Roman's restaurants called in a panic. Something had happened in the alley behind the property. The police would come in the morning. Feels. Certain books needed to look exactly like themselves, only cleaner. Vivian arrived to find Roman in a back booth in shirtsleeves with blood on one cuff. Not much. Enough. She looked at the cuff, then at his face. He said, Feels. Can you fix the timing exposure? She opened her laptop. Probably. Feels. They worked in silence for 3 hours, the kind of silence only possible between adults who understand that some truths are structural and some are merely lurid. She adjusted invoices, corrected sequence gaps, Feels. Aligned employee meal comps with camera timestamps, and built a version of the night that would withstand casual law enforcement scrutiny without inventing fantasy. When she turned the screen toward him just before dawn, Roman studied it for a long time. Feels. Then he looked up. Vivian, he said. The name froze the room. She had not told him it was hers, not officially, not ever. Yes, thank you. He reached across the table, not for her hand, but for the edge of the laptop, finger resting there lightly. Feels. Go home. Sleep. Take the morning. The day, she said, surprising herself. The corner of his mouth moved. The day, then. She walked out into harbor light the color of old pearls and realized with something close to shock that she was not afraid. Feels. Not of him, not of the city. Feels. Not even of the violence implied by blood on linen. Fear, she saw, had changed categories. Adrian had made her small because his power depended on her shrinking. Roman's power did not require her diminished. Feels. That difference became the axis on which everything turned. They did not kiss for 4 more months. In truth, they did not begin as lovers at all. They began as 2 people who recognized something useful and difficult in each other. Feels. Competence without illusion. The kiss came after an argument over a land-use contract in his office near 11 on a Tuesday. He said something dry enough to crack her composure. She laughed, reached out without thinking, and touched his lapel. Feels. He went utterly still, looked down at her hand, then up at her face. Don't do that unless you mean it, he said. She heard no seduction in his voice, only warning. What if I mean it, she asked. Then do it again. So she did. Feels. The kiss itself was not cinematic, no thunder, no urgent grasping. Feels. It was measured, almost grave, and for that reason more intimate than anything flashy could have been. He kissed as he did everything else, precisely, attentively, as if a promise were being made in a language no one else needed to overhear. Feels. Their relationship unfolded the way mature love often does when neither person is available for fantasy. She did not redeem him. He did not rescue her from herself. He remained capable of walking into rooms with consequences on his sleeves. Feels. She remained capable of waking from bad dreams with her heart racing and the old ballroom glare behind her eyes. But they moved around each other with uncommon honesty. He did not ask for stories she had not chosen to tell. Feels. She did not ask him for moral absolution he had no intention of performing. When he was tender, it came in small, undeniable acts. Coffee on her nightstand the way she liked it, no comment. Feels. A replacement pair of shoes after he noticed which ones hurt her feet by the way she shifted weight at events. His hand at the small of her back in crowded rooms, never possessive, always there. It was enough, more than enough, perhaps, Feels, for a woman who had learned how starved she had been for consistent respect. They married 10 months after the first kiss in a judge's office with Sophia as witness and no photographer. Vivian wore deep green heels. Roman wore the same coat from the night he came to Abriel's office because she liked that he had entered her life dressed like a consequence. Afterward, they drove to a house he kept on a cliff 2 hours north, Eels, a place with wind off the water and a porch where the ocean worked the rocks below in patient repetition. At dawn, he asked, "You're sure?" Not because he doubted her affection, because he understood marriage as an arrangement with weight. "I'm sure, Eels," she said. "You don't know me fully yet," he warned. Eels. "Neither do you," she answered. He considered that and nodded once. Their marriage did not cure her. That is another fantasy stories often tell because audiences like healed women more than healing ones. Eels. What it did was create conditions under which healing could continue without sabotage. She started therapy in year 2 with a clinician in another city who specialized in coercive relationships and public trauma. Eels. There she learned language for what had happened. Financial abuse disguised as business administration, identity erosion, performative humiliation, post-traumatic looping. Eels. She learned that leaving is not the end of coercion when the body still anticipates it. She learned slowly that dignity can be rebuilt through repetition the same way it was destroyed. Speak, be heard. Set a boundary. Watch it hold. Eels. Feel your body learn the new outcome. In the office she rose, not socially, structurally. Eels. She took over the legitimate holdings with such clean authority that older men in tailored suits began apologizing before she asked. Roman watched without performing pride. Sophia watched with unconcealed delight. Eels. "You know what your ex-husband did wrong?" she asked one afternoon while signing a stack of acquisition notes. Vivian looked up. Sophia tapped the page with her pen. "He mistook your steadiness for lack of force. A lot of men do that." Eels. "They think because a woman doesn't spend all day advertising power, she doesn't have any." Vivian sat with that. It felt truer than revenge talk ever had. By the 3rd year of her marriage, she no longer woke hearing Adrian every night. Eels. She could go weeks without thinking of him. She was no longer Vivian Hale, and no longer merely Vivian Lang. She was Vivian Versetti on paper, yes, but more than that, she was a person who had crossed through humiliation and not calcified around it. Eels. The educational value of that period, if anyone had cared to ask, was not in the glamour of reinvention. It was in the mundane truth that safety, honesty, and respect are not luxuries added after one has made it. Eels. They are what allow a person to become fully legible to themselves again. Then, on a cool evening in early autumn at a cocktail reception, some shipping coalition she barely cared about, a man near the bar said Adrian Cole's name. Casual, careless. Eels. "Cole Hale is in trouble," he told someone. "Lost Sheridan. Bank exposure's ugly. Whole thing could come down by Christmas." Roman, mid-conversation 2 feet away, felt her go still before he heard the reason. He did not ask in public. Eels. The next morning on the cliff porch, he set down his coffee and said, "Who is Adrian Cole?" She went inside, returned with the old legal pad, pages yellowing at the edges, 43 sheets of memory and pain and structure. "Read this," she said. Eels. He read for nearly an hour while wind turned pages against his hand. When he finished, he closed the pad very gently, turned one palm upward on the iron table between them. "Ask me." She looked at him. At the ocean. Eels. At the woman she had been and the one she had built. "I want to go home," she said, not because she missed the city, not because she wanted him back or needed apology, because some debts are not emotional, they are moral. Eels. Adrian had not merely left a marriage. He had deliberately dehumanized the person who made his rise possible, and then criminalized her exit by freezing accounts and calling authorities once she disappeared. Eels. She had learned this in fragments over the years through Jean, through Sophia's researchers, through public filings and quiet whispers. It mattered. "This isn't about getting him back," she told Roman. "It's not even about hurting him for sport." Eels. "If he had divorced me privately and fairly, I'd have cried for a year and then married a dentist in Connecticut. This is different. He made a spectacle because he needed everyone to see me reduced. He wanted narrative ownership." Roman listened. She continued. Eels. "I don't want him sorry. Sorry is cheap. I want him to understand. I want one room, one chair. I want him to look at my face and understand the size of what he threw away. The empire can collapse around that if it's already rotten. Fine." Eels. "But what I want is understanding." Roman was quiet a long time. Then he said, "You didn't say revenge. I don't want that word." "Why?" She touched the legal pad. because revenge belongs to people who still need something from the person who hurt them. Feels. I don't need anything from Adrian. I have a life, I have work, I have you. This is accounting. He has walked around with an unbalanced ledger for 3.5 years. I want to balance it. Roman put his hand over hers, warm, heavy, certain. Feels. All right, he said. All right, she asked. We go. Then, because he was Roman and did not pretend not to be himself, he added, I want to see him, she almost objected. He shook his head. I won't touch him. Feels. You ask for a room and a chair and understanding. That's what you'll have. But I want him to know who stands behind you now. Not because you need a man behind you, because he needs to see the category of mistake he made. In that moment, Feels, she understood another hard lesson about love and dignity. Support is not the same as dependence. Allowing someone to stand beside you while you reclaim your voice does not weaken the reclamation. Feels. It honors the fact that human beings heal best in honest company. Feels. They prepared for 4 months. Slowly, Roman's rule. Fast is for panic. Slow is for certainty. Vivian rebuilt Cole Hale from memory first, then from data Sophia's team gathered, then from Jean's reluctant archive. Feels. Jean had once been Adrian's personal assistant, and left after an incident no one pressed her to detail. Women know the shapes of certain stories without needing every room sketched. What Jean had kept, loan summaries, email threads, side letters, Feels. Draft agreements with handwritten edits, would have been boring to anyone without training and devastating to anyone with it. Feels. Vivian sat in a climate-controlled office above one of Roman's buildings and mapped Adrian's empire the way a doctor maps an infection. The diagnosis was worse than expected. Cole Hale was not a fortress. Feels. It was staged confidence with debt under the floorboards. Core operations had been bleeding for 3 consecutive years. Sheridan, once a Crown contract, had been sold at a loss to cover a margin call. Feels. 2 bridge loans came from men Roman knew socially and did not trust professionally. The flagship building bearing Adrian's name was levered almost to parity. Camille, now his wife, Feels, had been quietly named in a civil complaint 2 years earlier involving a real estate syndication scam in another state. Her lawyers had buried it, not erased it. Most damning of all, Feels. The structure held together largely because Adrian remained believable in person. He could walk into a room, widen his grin, tell a clean origin story, and make bankers feel personally chosen by the future. That is a real kind of power, Feels, and a fragile one. Reputation, properly inflated, functions like collateral until the first room decides it does not. Vivian did not want raids. She did not want tabloid exposure. She did not want the coarseness of public ruin for entertainment. Feels. She wanted something more educational than that, though she would not have used the word. Consequence should teach, not just punish. Feels. So the plan was designed around truth applied at the right pressure points. No lies, no fabricated scandals, no planted evidence, just a sequence of facts quietly reintroduced to people who had benefited from ignoring them. Feels. A supplier would review payment risk and decide caution was suddenly responsible. A bank officer would revisit a covenant breaches with less sentimentality than before. An investor over lunch with a mutual acquaintance of Romans, Feels, would hear enough to reconsider extending trust. Men who once returned Adrian's calls within 5 minutes would begin needing 2 days, then 4, then never. That was the elegance of it. Reality, once given permission, would do the cutting. Feels. Vivian reviewed every move for fairness the way a surgeon reviews an incision line. No innocent employees targeted. No payroll interruption if avoidable. No vendors pushed into collapse merely for proximity. You're being merciful. Feels. Sophia observed one night while they annotated lender exposure. Feels. No, Vivian said. I'm being precise, but it was mercy too, though she would not have admitted it yet. Public cruelty had once almost turned her into a harder person than she wanted to be. Precision let her avoid becoming Adrian in reverse. Feels. That mattered, even now, especially now. The week they arrived in the city she had fled, autumn light lay gold and hard across the water. Feels. They stayed not in any hotel Adrian's circle used, but in an apartment Roman, owned under a different name in a neighborhood that had gentrified while she was gone. The city looked familiar the way an old scar feels familiar under weather. Feels. That first night she expected insomnia. Instead she slept 8 hours and woke to Roman setting coffee on her nightstand. It's starting, he said. Which part? The bank. On Thursday of week 1, Feels, one of Adrian's larger suppliers requested revised payment assurances. Feels. On Friday, a private lender who had once accepted Adrian's charm as adequate due diligence asked for updated disclosures. By Monday, 2 calls placed from men Roman knew in Baltimore and New Haven made their way, politely and without threats, heels into the ears of men Adrian needed to stay comfortable. By Wednesday, heels. Adrian Cole sat in his corner office looking at the same spreadsheet for the third straight day while his left eye twitched. A detail Jean's still loyal friend in the office relayed by text because bureaucracies leak from the inside long before they break in public. Heels. Camille, to her credit, noticed. She was not stupid. She saw the tension rise, the return calls vanish, the brittle edge in Adrian's voice. But she had married the man after the peak. She had not helped pour the foundation. She understood image. Heels. She did not understand load-bearing walls. Vivian kept her own face calm while messages came in. Keep going, she texted Sophia after the first lender meeting ended badly. Heels. Slow. No noise. Adrian did not understand what was happening yet, which had always been part of the design. Consequence teaches best at the moment confusion turns to recognition. The fundraiser would be that moment. Heels. It was an annual event Adrian never missed, hosted in a downtown hotel ballroom 10 blocks from the townhouse he had once shared with Vivian. Same city, same tier of guests, same species of performance. On the afternoon of the event, Heels, Vivian stood in front of a full-length mirror and watched a stranger become legible. The dress was deep arterial red, severe rather than flashy, hair pinned loosely, small earrings, minimal makeup, heels. A watch Roman gave her that only wealthy people with actual taste would recognize. She looked like a woman who had survived information and was no longer frightened by it. Roman came up behind her in black tie stripped of fuss, heels, all dark lines and control. He settled his hands on her shoulders. You ready? No, she said. Good, he answered. Heels. Ready is for amateurs. She laughed, real, short, needed. Then he grew serious. If at any point you want to leave, squeeze my hand twice. I don't care if we're in the middle of a sentence. Roman, promise me. I promise. Heels. It mattered to him that she enter by choice and leave by choice. That mattered to her more than she said. Outside, the city moved through its evening with no idea what private ledger was about to close. The ballroom lobby smelled the same as years before. Heels. Green and gold carpet she had once hated. New doorman. New floral installations. Old money behaving as if time itself had signed a non-disclosure agreement. No one at the entrance recognized her. Heels. She had expected relief and felt instead a flicker of grief for the self who had once been fully visible in these spaces and never truly seen. Breathe, Roman murmured. She slowed her breathing. The announcement came at the door, Mr. Heels and Mrs. Roman Versetti, heads turned. Heels. Not because the name was famous in that room, because it was unfamiliar, and unfamiliar at that altitude usually meant power from outside the local hierarchy. They entered. Conversation thinned. Vivian felt the room register Roman first. The stillness, Heels, the coat, the old-world confidence that did not solicit approval, and only then her, attached not as ornament but as equal vector. At the far side of the ballroom, Adrian was laughing too hard at something a donor had said. Heels. Camille stood beside him in silver. The moment Adrian saw them, the laugh ended mid-shape. Not dramatically. Worse, he lost the next breath. Vivian watched recognition travel through him in stages. The strange woman in red, the posture, the eyes, Heels, the impossible possibility, then certainty. He paled. Camille followed his gaze, frowned, looked back again. Vivian almost pitied her. Almost. Roman did not squeeze her hand. He simply remained there, a human structure at her side. Heels. They moved through the room slowly. Heels. People made space without knowing why. A councilman Roman had done business with introduced himself. A hotel owner from Naples nodded from across the floor and deliberately did not approach. Small ripples. Heels. Signals Adrian would understand all too well once his blood began moving again. Vivian, he said finally when they stood 3 feet away. He spoke her name like someone lifting a relic they were not sure would burn them. She looked at him and found, Heels, to her own astonishment, that she did not hate him in the hot active sense. The hatred had long since cooled into assessment. That was better. Good evening, Adrian. Camille recovered fastest. I don't believe we've met, she said, Heels, offering a hand that Vivian declined with a smile too polite to be called a snub. I'm sure we have, Vivian replied, just not in a way you could admit at the time. Adrian winced. It was microscopic. Roman saw it. So did she. Heels. May we have a word? Adrian asked, trying to gather his old authority like spilled cufflinks. You may have a room, Roman said before Vivian could answer. His tone remained perfectly civil. One chair, if my wife still wants it. Heels. Adrian's eyes moved to Roman then, and something in them shifted from confusion to fear. Not because Roman raised his voice, because he did not. Men like Adrian understand hierarchy best in stillness. Eels. They were shown to a private conference room off the main corridor, one of those anonymous luxury spaces used for donor negotiations and discreet apologies. Vivian entered first. One chair waited at the center of the room exactly as requested. Eels. Adrian looked at it, then at her, and understood with a visible shudder that this had not been spontaneous. Roman stayed by the door, hands at his sides, presence enormous. Camille had been left outside, furious no doubt, but this moment was not hers. Eels. Adrian did not sit until Vivian said sit. He obeyed. Eels. The sight of it did not thrill her, it steadied her. You look well, he said weakly, defaulting to the banality of cowards. Do not, she said, insult me by pretending this is social. He swallowed. The room was very quiet. Eels. She took a breath and let years move through it. 3 years and 8 months ago, she said, you stood in front of a room full of people and made a theater piece out of my removal from a life I helped build. You stole my work before you stole my place. Eels. You put papers in front of me and called them routine. You moved my name off structures I designed. Then you stood under a spotlight and called that honesty. Adrian opened his mouth. Roman said nothing, but Adrian closed it again. Vivian continued. Eels. After I left, you told banks I had taken money. You froze accounts. You let the story circulate that I had become unstable. Do you remember that? He stared at the carpet. Yes, he said finally. Look at me. He did. She saw then what she had come for. Eels, not apology. Eels. Not grief, recognition, the dawning scale of it. I need you to understand something very simple, she said. If you had fallen in love with someone else and ended our marriage privately, fairly, with dignity, I would have survived you and forgotten you. Eels. I might have hated you for a year, maybe 2, but I would have forgotten you. What you did instead was try to erase a human being in public because you thought spectacle would make your theft look like evolution. That is who you are. Not ambitious. Eels. Not brave. Cruel in a tuxedo. He flinched harder at that than he had when she took the mic years before. Good. A small, cold part of her thought. Let accuracy sting. The company, he whispered after a moment, voice fraying. Was it you? The company? Eels. She said, is what it always was. Over-leveraged, poorly governed, dependent on your face and other people's silence. I did not invent your weaknesses, I remembered them. That landed. Oh, it landed. Eels. Because memory had always been the thing Adrian used to mock in fights. You bring up every little thing, he used to say, as if precision were nagging rather than witness. Now witness had teeth. Why? He asked, and there it was, the last ignorance. Eels. Not why destroy me. Why come back at all? Because I wanted you to understand, she said. I wanted one moment in which you did exactly what you had done, not to your balance sheet, to a person. He looked at Roman then, Eels, at the man by the door who had still spoken except once. Did you put her up to this, Adrian asked, because men who reduce women can only imagine women as extensions of male will. Roman's reply came calm and flat. No, I slowed her down. Eels. Adrian closed his eyes, a broken little movement the room held. Vivian stepped closer, but not close enough to soften the line. Do you understand now? She asked. He took a long breath, opened his eyes. Eels. And in them she finally saw it. Not remorse in the holy sense, not transformation, not redemption, but understanding, the exact thing she had asked for. Eels. He understood that the woman he had treated as infrastructure had not only survived but become the kind of force one cannot publicly define or privately contain. Eels. He understood that the empire trembling around him had not been toppled by theatrics, but by truth applied by the one person who had always seen its hidden load points. Eels. He understood that he had mistaken decency for weakness and familiarity for disposability. That was enough, more than enough. She nodded once. Good. Then she turned and walked to the door. Roman opened it. Behind them, Eels. Adrian said her name one last time. She did not stop. In the corridor, Camille rose from a bench, searching both their faces for a script she could still manipulate. Vivian spared her a single glance. You may want to hire a forensic accountant, Eels, she said, and a therapist, in that order. Eels. Then she and Roman walked back through the ballroom together, past chandeliers and polished donors and a quartet still trying to make elegance out of tension. People turned, whispered, Eels, registered that something had happened and would spend weeks inventing smaller versions of it, because the truth would be too exact to fit their appetites. Outside, cold air met her face like absolution without religion. At the car, Eels. Roman waited until the door shut behind them before asking, well, she leaned back against the seat, closed her eyes, felt for the old shaking and found none. Balanced, she said. He nodded as if she had reported on inventory. Eels. That was one of the reasons she loved him. He did not make her completion of a moral task into a sentimental spectacle. He simply witnessed it as real. On the ride back, Eels, she watched the city lights blur and thought not about Adrian but about the long road from Teresa's kitchen to that conference room, the haircut, the library, the legal pad, Eels, the therapist's office, the nights she had counted blanket threads, the women who had offered practical mercy instead of curious pity, the man beside her who had never once confused protection with possession, Eels. Revenge stories often end with ashes and applause. Real healing ends quieter, with room in the chest, with the body no longer braced against a hand that is not coming, Eels, with the knowledge that your dignity was never the thing someone else had the power to grant or revoke, only the thing they could obscure until you found your way back to it, Eels. Adrian's empire would continue its slow unraveling whether she watched or not. There would be lawyers, restructurings, humiliating meetings, numbers finally saying aloud what charm could no longer cover. That was weather, Eels. What mattered had already happened in the room with one chair. A man who had once believed he could replace her had been made to confront the fact that he never understood her value in the first place, Eels. And she, the woman he had tried to convert into a cautionary tale, had walked out not as vengeance incarnate but as proof of a more useful truth. You can be broken publicly and still rebuild privately into someone no humiliation can reach again, Eels. By the time they reached the apartment, Roman was fielding 2 quiet calls and Sophia had sent a single text, "Done?" Vivian typed back, "Done." Then, after a pause, "Better." That was the last surprise of it. She had gone back for balance, not relief, Eels. Yet relief arrived anyway, not as triumph but as spaciousness. In the weeks that followed, she returned to work, reviewed contracts, took meetings, called her mother, and for the first time told the full story. Her mother cried, then swore, then said, "Eels. I always knew he liked rooms too much." They laughed harder than the line could comfortably hold. Teresa got flowers. Rhoda got a watch she refused twice before accepting. Abriel, when informed in her usual terse way, grunted and said, "About time. Eels." Life resumed, which is the hidden grace after any just reckoning. The point is not to remain forever in the scene of correction. The point is to re-enter ordinary days without carrying someone else's shame in your hands. Years later, Eels, when younger women in business asked Vivian how she had survived what happened, she did not talk first about Roman or strategy or public confrontation. She said this: "Pay attention when respect leaves the room. It rarely slams the door. It goes quietly." Eels, in small decisions, in who gets informed and who gets managed, in whether your labor is acknowledged only in private and your sacrifices expected in silence. Don't wait for the stage. By the time the stage appears, the script has already been written, Eels. Also, when you can, choose people who tell the truth about who they are. Fancy lies ruin lives. Plain truth at least gives you a map. That may have been the deepest value of the whole story, Eels. Not that a discarded woman returned with a dangerous husband and buried a man's empire, though that part had its own cold beauty. No, the real value was that she learned, then taught, Eels, that respect is not a romantic accessory and dignity is not a social performance. They are practical protections. They are how we keep love from becoming ownership, ambition from becoming cruelty, Eels, and power from becoming a stage on which one human being tries to erase another. Adrian never learned all of that. Some people only learn the portion that costs them money. But Vivian learned enough for both of them, Eels, and then she went home. Not to the old city, not to the ballroom, not even to the house on the cliff, but to herself, which had been the destination all along.